This is so heavy. I don't know how I'm gonna take it up the stairs, but let's go. Oh. This is the on-call bag, and I am just praying that nobody calls me. Look how fresh these flowers have stayed, and they smell so good. Hi, and welcome to my video where I am going to share with you what my life is like as a mental health pharmacist. So quite a few people have just messaged me being like, can you show more of your day-to-day stuff? And yeah, I mean, it's really hard to, because obviously you can't film yourself talking to patients, you can't release any confidential information, I can't just walk around the wards vlogging. So it's hard to show what the life of a pharmacist really looks like. But if anyone's gonna do it, it's gonna be me. And so I thought I'd try and get as close to that as possible. Obviously, there's no patients in my video, nothing like that. But there is gonna be, you know, snippets of me doing my work, and I just wanted to share that with you all. So my video is called My Day in the Life as a Mental Health Pharmacist. So obviously, it's going to be different for other mental health pharmacists, and it's particularly different for me because I'm a junior pharmacist, so I'm at the lowest band, and that means that we're not really given hugely crazy specialist roles. It's still rotational, so it's not as mental health as you would think, but it still obviously is a lot of mental health. And so I just wanted to put it out there that obviously this video is not going to represent everyone, but it is going to show you what my day looked like. So I've just switched rotations now, and I no longer commute. It takes me literally half an hour door to door to get to work now, but for 4 months I was commuting to Uxbridge, and it was taking an hour and a half there and an hour and a half back. And now I'm on a new rotation where I'm in dispensary and on an adult ward, but I'm just going to talk about the previous 4 months because that's what I know the most detail about. So basically I would just wake up around 6:45, probably about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm just not a morning person, so I wasn't sat and making breakfast like my housemates do. I would just get ready and get straight out the door, and I'd always stop by my favourite cafe. And this became such a bad habit because I really shouldn't have spent so much money, but because I had such a long commute, it was just a really reassuring drink. And so I always rewarded myself in the morning with one of those and a pain au chocolat. So I'd get that, I'd get on the tube and then make my way to Uxbridge. Once I got off at the station, I would get onto a bus and then get to the hospital and then walk to the hospital. So once I reached the hospital, I was doing 3 things there. The first thing was called the home treatment team. Now this is when people are not unwell enough to be in hospital as an inpatient, but mentally not stable enough to not have treatment. And nurses and doctors would go and see the patient at their home and treat them at their home and keep an eye on them and keep updates on them and keep going to visit them and things like that. And I guess I found this hard because I'm used to seeing patients. So if I'm giving medication, I want to see who I'm giving it to. And home treatment team didn't offer that. So it was really hard because what I'd have to do is literally turn up to work, go to home treatment team, which would literally be a room full of the nurses and doctors, and then just get a bunch of charts and screen them. So I've turned the folders over so there's no confidential information, but basically throughout the day I have a lot of lone working when I'm basically just sat with charts, and I don't think that's been that good for my mental health, to be honest. I really struggled not having that chart to a face kind of connection. The nurses and doctors would get consent to see their summary care records, and then I would screen the drug chart against the summary care record and the notes, and then the discharge letter would also be finalised without speaking to the patient. So I mean pharmacy couldn't speak to the patient, obviously the nurses and doctors did, but we couldn't. So it wasn't my favourite thing at all. In fact, I probably hated it the most because I was not in a good place myself, and to read stuff about like paranoia, schizophrenia and hallucinations and all of that stuff was just not good for me at the time. I actually liked the staff a lot there, but I just wasn't feeling it in terms of my pharmacist work. The second thing that I was doing was looking after an elderly ward, and this was good. It was a good introduction to mental health. I think because the turnover was so slow, the patients would be there for months and months and months. So it did get really actually quite boring. We had, you know, one meds rec to do or like one discharge. And so I had a lot of spare time on my hands. It gave me a lot of time if I wanted to research something. I had so much time in the world, probably too much time, but I had all the time in the world to actually search it. They had a lot of physical health medications as well. It still brought into mental health, like the physical health side of it. But I guess it wasn't as dynamic as, say, an adult ward. So right now I'm looking after an adult mental health ward, and I find that much more like thrilling because you just don't know what's going to happen. You go on the wards and you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen today? Like, I could get attacked. We all have panic alarms and things. It was a nice introduction, but it wasn't like thrilling or exciting or dynamic. So this is the room for handover, and we're just about to wait for all of the staff members to come in, and we're just going to discuss the patients. Okay, so ward round is just finished, and we went through all the patients, discussed the plan and everything. And I managed to check everyone's charts in the ward round, so I don't need to do that again now. I've checked for new medications, so I know that there's nothing left to order. And now I'm just going to talk you through a blank drug chart. So in a blank drug chart, you have obviously the patient details here, and then we write down whether pharmacy's done the medicines reconciliation or not. And then we write any like extra information here, for example, whether they have a dosset box from the community pharmacy, or they're on any critical medications or Parkinson's medications that the nurses need to be aware of. Here is usually kind of things that are variable dosing, so we do write stuff like warfarin on here because it can change depending on what the INR is. Then as you open it, you get your as required medication, so always check these. All of these boxes should be filled in, so it has to be signed by the doctor. I sign it after the doctor has signed it, just to say that I'm happy with it. The start date, when it was started, how often, and the maximum dose in 24 hours. You also on this side get the patient details here and the allergies, so that you can check all the time whether the patient is prescribed anything that they're allergic to, which obviously they should not be. And then you get once only doses, so for example if they've had antibiotics, the end of a dose when they've come from hospital. So for example if they were started on a 7-day course and then on the 7th day they come here, then that we write once only doses here. So we also write injections, so if they are on rapid tranquilization, we also have the injections details here. This is the place where we write the depots, so antipsychotic depots, which are, you know, long acting and given say once every 2 weeks or once every month. This part is the regular medications, so I always check the medication, I check the dose, what route it is, any additional instructions like, you know, monitor blood pressure, urea and electrolytes, etc. I check that it's signed by the doctor. I also check that the frequency is circled and it's correct. And along here, I always check that the nurses have signed that it's been administered. And if it hasn't, I'll just bring it up and say, has this person had their medication? Because you haven't signed for it. And that's basically a really quick whistle-stop tour of how I check the prescriptions in mental health. And obviously, I always check whether there's any interactions as well. I've had to be really quick because I'm off to the next ward now. But yeah, that is basically how I come in and check the prescriptions. And if you've got any questions, then add them in the comments. So I was just about to leave the ward, but the doctor has asked me to write a list of all patients that are on antipsychotics. So I'm about to do that before I leave. On this ward, at the end of my rotation, 2 of the most loveliest doctors came, and they really were receptive to pharmacy and open and wanted pharmacy. So they were like, you know, can you sort this out? Can you do this? And I really liked that because I felt like I was part of the team. And so I think in terms of input wise, I had much more input on this elderly ward than I did on the home treatment team. The next thing I did was something called an intermediate care unit, and this had nothing to do with mental health. So when patients were discharged from an acute hospital and not well enough to go home in terms of like physiotherapy, they'd come onto this intermediate care unit. And so I visited this ward as well, and then I would just screen all of the charts, order new medications, and yeah, I didn't really have much input on this ward until I got to know the doctor. So I think it's actually really important to establish good relationships with the doctors, because I think that once they know what you're there for and you know how you can help them, it becomes much easier. So now I'm in the intermediate care unit, and although I work for mental health, this department is not for mental health patients. It's basically like a step down after patients have been in hospital and they're not well enough to go home, but they're not unwell enough to be in an acute hospital. so it's like an in-between ward. I've checked all the charts. We've had one new patient, so I've done the medicines reconciliation. I've spoken to him, I've checked his summary care records, I've checked the discharge letter and the chart, and ordered the medication for him. So yeah, you probably wouldn't normally have this role as a mental health pharmacist, but as we're rotational, like junior band 6 pharmacists, I think that it's good to have sort of, you know, a change, a different role within mental health. So I think it's quite good. I enjoy coming to this intermediate care unit because it gives you a break from mental health, and you're still getting your physical health knowledge. But still, I am the only pharmacist here, and it is quite an isolating job. I really miss being in an acute hospital where there are more band 6s, but that's a story for another day. It was a balancing of home treatment team, an elderly ward, and an intermediate ward. So those are the 3 things that I was doing as a mental health pharmacist. Like I say, that was my previous rotation. On my current rotation, I'm half of the day in dispensary and half of the day in an adult ward, which is different to what I was doing before. So everyone's experience as a mental health pharmacist will be different, but this is how mine was. So yeah, I am not gonna be a mental health pharmacist soon. I am moving to an acute general hospital at the end of the month. I think it's really important to recognize that if something isn't for you, then to make changes. I guess I could have stayed and given mental health more of a chance, but I already had done 6 months of mental health experience in the pre-reg days, and I didn't really enjoy it then, but then I thought as a pharmacist it would be different. And when I took the job, I think that I was more obsessed with it being in London, and I had all of these sort of visions of what my life would be and what my job would be, when actually it was nothing like I imagined. So I think really you need to read the job description carefully and properly, and really think about how the job is going to look, not just get carried away by the title, which is kind of what happened to me. So yeah, I would say read the job description carefully, and also just recognize when you think a specialism is not for you. You've got to do it to know that it's not for you. And maybe I'll go into mental health again at another time, but I think right now as a rotational band 6, I really need that that baseline foundational general health knowledge, and I don't really have that. Going straight into mental health as a band 6 pharmacist, not only was it too specialist, but because the turnover was so slow, on top of my commute and all of that, it just wasn't the best time that I've had. And I just prefer like bam, 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 like being so busy throughout the day. I'm an overthinker. I think about everything, about the past, about now, about the future, about everyone in my life and everyone who's not in my life and all of that. And I just think that I need a job where I'm just, you know, frazzled and hopefully learn so much, and I just need to be busy. And I just prefer working in bigger teams. I came from an acute trust where I had all of the 6s and all the 7s and pre-reggers, and we'd all go to the back of the canteen and eat together. To go from that to then a team of 1 6, 1 7, 1 8 and a tech, like there was only 4 of us in the pharmacy team, it was just too small, and I didn't want to eat in the office because I don't like eating where I work, and so I just walked down to the canteen and eat on my own, which I kind of enjoyed towards the end of it. But yeah, I guess I just felt isolated quite a lot, and I probably isolated myself a lot as well. So that is why I'm leaving mental health. But some people, like some of the friends that I've made at mental health, in the mental health trust that I work for now, absolutely love it, and it could be right for you, but it just wasn't for me. So yeah, that's generally just describing to you what my day looked like as a mental health pharmacist. I hope that this was insightful, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!